Yukon Huang is a senior fellow of the Asia program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I asked him about China's anti-corruption campaign since it was implemented shortly after President Xi took office.
Well, I think it's certainly having a major impact on behavior. It sent a signal that corruptive behavior is no longer acceptable. Corruption has created tensions because of the inequality it creates, the kinds of rent-seeking activities. I think it was quite appropriate that the government takes this more seriously. And now in these two sessions, there is further actions to make sure you can deal with corruption both through strengthening the rule of law, constitutional changes, and institutional changes. The creation of a commission essentially means that you want to address this more broadly. It's not just the party, not just government officials. The private sector's average citizens are involved in these processes. It's the role of society. It's, I think, quite appropriate that you actually create a body that looks at it much broadly. And if you do that, you're going to be able to address what I would call the systemic factors driving corruption. It's not just immoral behaviors. There are reasons or pressures that encourage corruption. And you need to deal with this more what I call in a broader way. And I think some of these reforms are appropriate for that purpose.
So talking about those reforms, this next phase of the crackdown is expected to net even more officials. A lot already have been caught. Do you think this is realistic? Can this happen?
Well, first, you have to send out a signal to everyone that past behaviors are no longer acceptable. Corruption is so ingrained in both society's activities as well as in economic transitions that a large range of people involved. I don't think you can eliminate this in terms of arresting everyone. That's not the issue. The first point I think has to be made is things are going to change. We're going to follow different kinds of rules and procedures. At some point, I think the government has to sort of like say, we've gone as far as we can. But what you want to then do is to say, what's been encouraging this? How do I actually change that? And let me give you what I think is a fundamental issue. You essentially have a mixed economy, which is unusual for China. Resources, opportunities, they're essentially controlled by the state. But higher growth, the private sector, they've been expanding their activities over the last several decades. And why? Because they generate higher returns. That's why China grows at a very high growth rate. So you have a problem. The resources are controlled by the state, but the use of those resources are more effectively done by private companies and individuals, the entrepreneurs. So how do you actually allow these resources to be used by the private sector? Now, corruption, either in what I call legal or illegal means over the last several decades, is essentially allowed the private sector to make use of these resources, and this has fulfilled China's growth objectives. But corruption is one of the byproducts. So how do you eliminate this kind of behavior in a way that's what I call acceptable to society? A stronger legal system, more clarification on rules of economic behavior, what's appropriate or not, more channeling of resources so they're readily available to the private sector so that corruptive behaviors aren't necessary. So beyond creating of an institution, I think there's also a need for formulating a strategy to address these kinds of pressures that encourage corruption in this country.
And how will this corruption campaign continue, or what will change? Or will it grow even more with President Xi at the helm longer? Well,
I think he's right in saying that this has to be brought into control. It's basically weakened the faith of the citizens in terms of the role of government or the rule of law. So I think he's trying to address these issues. But I think the problem is going to get very difficult in the coming years because you have to start addressing why do people resort to corrupt behaviors? Why has corruption increased in this country, even though economically it's been doing very well? And I think this kind of approach that they are taking in these meetings is an attempt to start to put in a stronger basis to address these concerns.
All right, Yukon Huang, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome.